JCPS Science community, and welcome to our session on enhancing engagement through discourse and rich tasks, brought to you today by myself, Lacey Eckels, K-12 Science Lead, and my partner in crime, Charlotte Ivey, the K-12 Science Coach, and some very special guests. We know that science is founded on that premise that we figure it out together, and this year should not be any different. In fact, in this environment, it is critical to keep your classroom community learning together. However, discourse doesn't exactly look the same as it did in your brick and mortar classroom. So how can we stay true to figuring it out together in a collaborative classroom community when we can't even see our students face to face? Well, it's going to take a mixture of adapting those old tried and true strategies and creating whole new practices and activities. Even though we are in a digital setting, we've still got to believe that rich science learning can occur. And that learning happens in classrooms where students are positioned as knowledge constructors and sense makers, and where us as teachers leverage those students' experiences and ideas as the class works together to develop explanations for phenomenon. But none of this can occur if we don't provide opportunities for students to engage. So, what should we be paying attention to when creating engaging remote science classrooms? Well, we need to have a thoughtful balance of the asynchronous and synchronous learning opportunities while still reflecting that essence of the 5 E's. We need to ground students' knowledge construction and meaning making through rich tasks. And we got to remember that communication and collaboration are essential for science sense making and also backpack skills. And finally, we need to provide students with opportunities to connect their thinking to their peers' thinking through discourse. So NGSS focuses, on these 3 dimensions of learning: DCIs, disciplinary core ideas, SEPs, science and engineering practices, and cross-cutting concepts, or CCCs. And that unique combination of 3 dimensions promotes students' development, of this conceptual understanding. But how can we engage students in the practices, and the cross-cutting concepts to learn the content, or the DCIs, in these distance learning environments? Well, first things first, we've got to think about how we use our time with our students. What will we have students doing during synchronous time? What about asynchronous time? How can we best use our synchronous time? On the screen is a sample schedule that's grounded in those 5 E's, but is prioritizing what we're going to talk about today: discourse and sense making. And that's occurring during synchronous time, the explain phase of the 5 E's. Now more than ever, students and teachers, and honestly, possibly parents, should be engaged in teaching and learning that helps everyone involved fall into somewhat of a predictable routine. This isn't to say content and learning goals should be predictable, but rather we should bring consistency to the learning process through the use of a solid but flexible framework. For example, in our case, possibly the 5 E framework. So how could we use those 5 E's to help us plan rich tasks during asynchronous and synchronous time? And what's the teacher going to do during that time? What's the student do during that time? Linked on this slide, and also found on the JCPS Science website, is a sample virtual science instructional framework. The framework is still designed around the 5 E's like our brick and mortar one, but adapts it for that virtual setting. So if you're interested in learning more, check out this slide deck and the JCPS website. But I want to make sure we have plenty of time for our special guests. So we have a panel of 5 teachers from all over our district here to talk to you about how they take those 4 pillars and make them come to life in their classrooms. So instead of Charlotte and I talking to you about the different strategies that you might use, we've called in the experts. So think of the next 20 minutes as a low budget, late night science talk show where our guests might not be starring in the next blockbuster, but I'd argue they're doing a job that's even harder: engaging students virtually in awesome science. As you can see from the slide, we have a vertical slice of our district, from elementary school, our itty bitties, all the way up to high school. So let's dig in and hear what sage advice our guests have.
All right, thanks for that, Lacey. So let's dive into that first big idea around synchronous and asynchronous, and how we can engage our students during these times, once again, by using the 5 E's of science instruction. So for distance learning, the explore is undoubtedly the most difficult phase to tackle. Rather than having to mentally think, how can we do this, or this can't be done, how might we modify exploration with and without technology in ways to lend themselves to our current virtual situation? So really honing in on that explore phase that we can find to be very difficult during virtual. Monique, do you have anything to say on that?
Absolutely. So one of the biggest things with the explore phase that I found during this time is simply taking these big ideas that we usually have in the classroom and making them homemade in a sense. So whether that be scaling down a experiment with salinity with a plant and watering it over days over time, I encourage students to go into their kitchens, look at the fruit that they have, put it in some water, talk about those variables, and let it sit for the day to our next lesson. And that kind of just helps the students to explore the topic, engage with it, and just really just take in what we would normally blow up in the classroom and, you know, make it in homemade, Betty Crocker style.
I had a similar situation for the explore stage. We just finished plants as well. So we did a junkyard lesson that was supposed to be using things literally from your trash to make a organism that would fit with a certain function. So for example, if you gave them the fact that your animal was able to live in a cold climate, then they may have chosen to make a polar bear out of a water bottle and some toilet paper, maybe not right now, but things around their house that they had that they could actually use. And then they just took a picture of it and sent it to me as their assignment.
Awesome. Thank you guys for those insights. I love being able to allow kids to do things from home. I think that's awesome. So let's add on another piece here. I'm thinking about how do we help engage students by offering them a voice and choice in what they're doing in science, and then thinking about those 5E phases, which ones of those phases potentially allow students to have some voice and choice, and how have you been able to do that within your classroom? Jessie, you got something on that?
Yeah, thanks. So one of the big things that I've found helpful, just eliciting student ideas and getting student voice, is using the driving question board. And that is an amazing way to get them just all their ideas out on the table. So we use Jamboard, which I'm sure we'll mention multiple times today. So that's a great way to get them. They have their autonomy. They can add their own Post-it notes. They can express their own ideas. They can make it anonymous, or they can put their name on it if they want. But they can share their ideas at the beginning of a phenomenon to just get the ideas on the table, and then we get a chance to come back to them later.
Awesome. Eric, did you have something to say?
Go ahead, Monique.
Oh, I was going to say, I also use it asynchronously. There's a tool that I learned about, or I guess it's still Jamboard, but it's called like JotSpot. And I assign students a number, and before the lesson, sometimes we do like I wonders, or I already know, and the students can take like a sticky note and they can go to their number. So that lets me know the students are engaging. It helps me take attendance and all that good stuff. So that's kind of cool too.
I was going to add that during the explain phase, I have found that it's been really important to give them choice, maybe even more than I would have in the school environment, just because I'm not providing them with all the materials. So for our first unit, when we talked about plants and animals, like Melissa was talking about, one of our summative assignments was to, explain everything they had learned about plants, their structures and their functions. So they were able to write an argument, which we had kind of worked on collaboratively earlier in the unit. They could create a comic strip. They could make a model, which we had made with animals earlier. And they could make an infographic using, Google Drawings, slides, or just anything they could find around the house. So my favorite part so far of being stuck at home has been really seeing their creativity shine through with everything they're able to come up with, which ends up looking, different than everybody else in the room.
Our PLC has been talking so much about how tests just aren't giving them the opportunity to demonstrate their knowledge. So really, I think that's the choice part comes in, is like what, and we just had this conversation before this meeting, like what can we do in the future? Because these forms that for a test are not telling us if they really know it. And so just kind of making sure that you're giving them that choice, whether it's a choice board or whether it's, like I said, just a modeling activity that's very a blanket thing where, and something at home where you can model the SEM system, which is what we tried to do with the students. And it might flop. Some kids came in and we were like, oh, that model's great. And I'm like, oh, okay. But what we did is we had students just analyze those models and talk about implementation. So just giving them as much choice as possible where that leads to discourse too and conversations.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that with us, Lauren. So the next thing I want to talk about is a little bit about, so what does your synchronous and asynchronous instruction look like? Not so much, what the week looks like, but when you're in those different things, what does that instruction look like? Monique, you have something for us?
Yeah, so asynchronous pretty much just looks like the students exploring the whole time. They're really driving in and answering the question themselves, their focus question themselves. And then synchronously, that's when we get into the explaining, like maybe they are confused about something, or I'm like, hey, what did you guys find out? They come with questions, concerns. Actually, it's usually a lot of concerns with human activity.
Let's go ahead and let's look at the next one of those 4 big ideas, which is all around rich tasks. So we know our students are more engaged if they participate, right, in cooperative learning activities that challenge them to solve problems and complete interactive tasks. Designing learning opportunities that are rich and meaningful over trivial completion work is critical, yet challenging for us in this virtual setting. So can you guys, some of you talk to us about how you're designing tasks that are rich and meaningful for both synchronous and asynchronous time? Melissa, thank you.
But I wanted to add, if I could, so I'm going to sound like a Pear Deck cheerleader right now, but so Pear Deck has saved my life. As far as getting student responses. My high school students are not big on turning the cameras on, which is fine. They're getting better at talking, but Pear Deck allows them to engage with the material in a way that I would never understand the student thinking without. So I ask them a question on pretty much every slide. Like they badger me for the Pear Deck link right now when they get into class. So every slide I show them, they have an opportunity to respond. It is the best way I have ever seen to get each individual kid's idea, including in the classroom, because we can't ask every single kid simultaneously the same question. So this allows me to see each kid's response in a really immediate way. I can share those responses with them, and it's anonymous, so they can learn from each other, which is another amazing bonus to this. So I've found that to be the most beneficial part of with NTI situation, getting kids' ideas out on the table. I would consider that a rich task.
So when I think about walking down the halls of a school, a JCPS classroom or school a year ago, you see, when you peek into a science classroom, you see all kinds of amazing things, right? You see students building seed dispersal contraptions, researching environmental issues with dams, building stream tables, using hydrochloric acid to mimic the effects of acid rain on limestone statues. You see all of this hustle and bustle and movement within science classrooms, and all of these experiences have this one key critical piece in common, and that's student collaboration, right? They're never doing those activities alone. They're doing them collaboratively. And we know that research shows time and time again that students learn more when they work together. So knowing all the good feels that gave me in the brick and mortar classroom, I was really concerned about what does that look like in an NTI setting? And how can we not lose the powerful practice of collaboration when we're talking to screens? So, knowing how powerful it is, what strategies might you guys have to encourage student collaboration, thinking through it synchronously and thinking through it asynchronously, depending on what that environment might be?
We do a lot of sharing. So kids are able asynchronously to find examples of plants around the house and take a picture, or find an object that shows motion and take a video with it. And so a lot of our discussion and collaboration kind of happens whole group when they get to share out. But also one of my favorite activities that we have done in the breakout rooms, which we try to use a lot, has been the plant debate. So before we got to the final summative of our plant unit, we had learned about all the structures and functions of all the parts, of the plant, and how they help the plant survive and grow and reproduce. And then, so randomly, I put them in a breakout room, had a very simple Google Doc that I had shared with all of them with their breakout room numbers on there. And then I randomly gave each room one structure of the plant. And so once they were in the breakout rooms, they had to work together to go back through everything they learned to write down their reasons why their plant structure was the most important to the plant. So they had a day or two in their breakout rooms to come up with all the reasons. And then eventually we came back as a whole group and had a full-on debate through our whole group Google class. So they really got excited about that. And that was the first time I felt like I had a collaborative activity that could go in their backpack and that I could really feel like they worked on together. Because that, like you said, that's one of the things I miss most about the science classroom. So I'm trying to piggyback off that idea as we get into the later stages of our energy and motion unit. How am I going to translate that into a new debate or, a similar idea that they can work on together?
I established professional learning communities, kind of like how we have PLCs with our grade level or our departments. I established those with our students. So maybe Kendra, Kenyatta, and Cameron and Corey, I just think of K names, I don't know, but maybe they're all in a PLC for the term. So the students, they work together on different assignments, those that maybe I would have had them work together with in a classroom. By creating a slides presentation, they all have to populate it. But the students work together. That way in their breakout rooms, I can split them up, but they get back with their normal PLC, and then they just share out their ideas. So just establishing those norms in the very beginning. And like you said earlier, I can't remember who just said it, but in the beginning, it was like silly things that the students would do together, but they built their PLCs up and they built that community up, and they're able to collaborate more and work together. So that's one of the things that I try to push, is just ask your PLC member or tell on your PLC member or something like that. So that's a tool that I like to use.
And that actually kind of makes sense when you think about it, right? Like in a brick and mortar classroom, your kids are at a table together for the same table, right? For typically 6 weeks, 9 weeks, depending on it. So I guess you're establishing like virtual tables, right?
Yeah, and that works well, especially this year is my first year with ELL students. So this is a whole different ball game for me. But I speak like 5 different languages now, by the way. But
congratulations.
But yes, that definitely works out because I can mix up the PLCs and the breakout rooms based on maybe this is going to be my Spanish group for today or my Somali group for today, or no one speaks English in this group today, Yeah, so it's awesome for collaboration with other teachers as well.
That's great. Jessie, do you have anything from a high school perspective?
I do. So I wanted to say all of your ideas are great, and I'm planning on stealing most of them. So the things that I would feel bad about not mentioning, because most of you guys said something about modeling. So modeling I'm super into right now. So the gallery walks have been really helpful for us, and you have probably seen these before in Jamboard again. So having student work, and we actually just had a discussion about this today in our PLC, that it's very difficult to get students to start getting into creating models themselves. So we may even all three of the biology teachers combine forces and make a Jamboard to help the students realize like what it is that we want from the models, but it gives them this collaboration where they can respond to other student work with the Post-it notes. I agree with Susie's model because of this. Or I have a question about something else. There's lots of good resources online for doing gallery walks for modeling, especially with Jamboard too. So that has been really helpful for us for collaboration. I've also opened up the Google Classroom stream, which was warned, it feels like dangerous territory. But I have allowed students to comment in that, and that has helped too, as far as getting some student crosstalk. They will respond in the stream to each other, and that's been helpful as well.
Thanks, that's awesome. So we have collaboration techniques, right? All of you have shared some ways that you're getting students to collaborate, but when they're collaborating, how are we getting them to have discourse, right? That's a little different, right, than just some simple collaboration. So we know that's a powerful practice and essential for student sense making, and it allows students the opportunity to make their reasoning public. Student discourse does, and helps you develop that reasoning further, and also critique, right, each other on your scientific reasoning. So it also allows us as teachers, when we have student discourse, to really determine what students have figured out, and then helps you determine those next steps. But discourse obviously looks a lot different in this virtual setting. And so I'm curious, what strategies are you guys using to promote this discourse in this funky NTI setting, be it synchronous discourse or be it asynchronous discourse? Lauren, do you have any tips and tricks from a middle school teacher standpoint?
Well, and I think I'm going to start with this too. And I think we're also quick to want to, no, not all of us, but teachers are quick to shut a kid down. And I think you have got to allow them to, don't shut them down, because then they won't talk. They won't want to, build off each other or say anything else. I always am as positive as possible too. Even if it's completely far off and I'm like, what did they just say? I'm like, well, that's really great. But does anybody else, what do you guys think? What can we add to that? So it's always, it's always a positive. Always give positives. You never want to beat them down. You never want to make them feel defeated. So definitely starting, with that.
I want to mention that I love the positivity point that you just made, Lauren. I have been trying to be as positive as possible with every student, just to get them to come back for that positive reinforcement. Every one of them, I told them they're all doctors now. I gave them med degrees. So so that has been really helpful for getting kids to come. But for helping with discourse, I really feel like getting those norms set at the beginning has been helpful. My students are very willing to put ideas out there without criticism. So we always tell them, we're critiquing ideas and not people. So they feel very free. And so just today, even I got a lot of maybes in responses, and I told them, I was like, I love that you're saying maybe, because you feel comfortable sharing your ideas without feeling like you have to be right. So setting that norm up, I think, has been really helpful for getting them that conversation piece, so they feel like they can say something without being judged.
Yeah, I would probably argue, right, setting norms up in any situation is step number one to get them to move forward in discourse or collaboration or breakout rooms or exploring investigations or norms just of how we exist in a virtual setting. Absolutely. Does anybody else have anything else to share? Any final words of wisdom for our folks listening at home? I see Mo has her hand up.
I kind of just wanted to share with the discourse part too. I think that a lot of times everyone thinks that, or science is so serious. They just take it so serious. And it's like, this is what we're doing. Think like a scientist. And I think that breaking up the science and adding in the fun part really gets those kids talking, whether that be about the wrinkles in their hand and them taking long showers or having a million chores and having to wash dishes, and comparing that to something that is going on in the lab or the investigation that you're doing. I think that that really sets the tone for the students to open up, make a connection, and that person that normally is wrong, they can at least feel like they're contributing. And now they'll think about my wrinkly fingers and being dehydrated or whatever the case may be.
I think you're talking about the power of a real world phenomenon, right? That's what I mean. That's how we get kids to care, right? Like, why does it matter to me?
I would agree with that. Like I kind of said it earlier, but the best part has been them being able to not only make real world connections that I've kind of set up for them, but that they have to go find themselves in their actual real world. So whether it's them getting on their bike and taking a video of them using a gentle force or a stronger force, or them, like you said earlier, breaking open their celery without me telling them to, and just kind of bringing it back the next day and showing the inside of it, without even being directed to that. It does have its advantages for them to be at home and to be able to think about science in their real world. So that's probably been my favorite part.
I think if you want buy-in from your students, I think the first thing is your attitude. I think, and so we can talk about science and, the 5 E's. I know it's so super important, but I think a lot of people forget that, yes, we're all going through a hard time, but like, it's our job to really hype these kids up. So if I want my kids to be excited, I have to be excited too. I mean, I'm singing them songs about, it's all about that tilt, no distance. And they're singing it back to me and I'm cracking up like, yes, this is what it's about. So like, you have to have fun, let go of the fact that like, yes, we are so pressed for time and content, but like, if you really want them to be engaged and you really want them to learn, make it meaningful and make it fun. So.
You guys are awesome. I don't even really know what to say with all the wonderful things that you guys said. I will say one quick little plug for the new JCPS Science website, because I know we talked about Discourse and talk moves, and we talked about norms during this virtual setting. And so if you haven't checked it out, you might want to check it out, because there's all kinds of phenomenal resources on there that you might want to use. So I just want to say, wow, you guys are incredible. I love this panel that we had. I'm hoping that the boss down there, Lacey, is going to let us do this again sometime, because I think this is a phenomenal way to share with teachers. Teachers sharing with other teachers, I think, are great. So I just want to remind you, we started out with these 4 big ideas, right? Around how to engage kids in science during remote learning. And we had some fabulous ideas from all of these folks on how to do that. And there's just no one ingredient right to engaging our students in our virtual classroom. We found that that's been very difficult, but you guys all talked about some wonderful successes that you're having. And so every teacher will find approaches that work best for them and their personality and teaching style. Hopefully, the amazing ideas of the colleagues here today will help get you started on that. So thank you so much, and we really appreciate you guys.